We make decisions all day long. Some of them are tiny, like which coffee shop to go to this morning, and some of them are huge, like whether you should stretch your finances for your dream home. And we all feel like we're in charge of these decisions, like we're the CEO of our life, calling shots from the corner office of our brain. But a series of experiments have been used to argue that this feeling of free will is an illusion. In the 1980s, the neuroscientist Benjamin Libet invited people into his lab, hooked them up to an EEG machine to measure brain activity, and instructed them to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. The results were surprising. He showed that there was a specific brain signal that showed up some 0.3 of a second before a person felt the decision to move, a signal that he called the readiness potential. And the finding's been replicated and expanded on since then. One study had participants choose between pressing the left or right button. Using fMRI, the scientists were able to predict which button they would press several seconds prior with 60% accuracy. And another study used electrodes that were placed directly in patients' brains to predict decisions with an 80% hit rate. These studies have been cited heavily by scientists and philosophers involved in the free will debate, with some using these findings as evidence that when we make a decision, what we experience as the sensation of choosing is actually our conscious self taking credit for automatic, subconscious processes that we had nothing to do with. But there's a big catch to all these experiments. The decisions being made by the participants are trivial and arbitrary. There's no penalty and no reward involved with a random choice between a left and right button, and there's no real reason to prefer one button over the other. This type of arbitrary choice is a far cry from what we experience when we make decisions that do matter. In those cases, we weigh pros and cons, we deliberate. And these types of big decisions seem to be much more relevant to the free will debate. So a natural question is, do Libet's findings hold true for more meaningful, deliberate decisions? To test this, some researchers set up an experiment with a high-stakes decision. They gave volunteers the choice for how to donate $1,000, and this was real money that actually went to the charities selected. Sometimes the volunteers had to pick which of two organizations got the full $1,000, a deliberate choice. Other times, regardless of which charity was selected, the two organizations would each receive $500, an arbitrary choice. As expected, the readiness potential showed up in the brain for the decision that didn't matter, where both charities got half of the money. But when they were making deliberate decisions about who would get the full donation, this signal essentially vanished. This finding suggests that there are different brain processes involved in the two types of decision making. When you ask the brain to flip a coin, it flips one for you. But when actual conscious reasoning is involved, there's no coin flip happening. And remember that the Libet-style experiments weren't perfectly accurate. Being able to predict which button someone will press several seconds in advance with 60% accuracy is impressive, and better than random chance, but it's far from a dagger in free will. Even the most impressive success rate at predicting what participants would do based on brain readings is 80%. If this readiness potential really is the decision being made subconsciously, does that mean 20% of us have free will and the other 80% are NPCs? What these studies seem to be giving us are probabilities. And a more reasonable interpretation of the readiness potential is that it's a slight unconscious bias towards a certain choice, not an actual firm decision. People who argue in favor of free will don't usually believe that we have complete control over our outcomes. Our genetics and environment affect us greatly. Something like height is almost completely out of our control, but it's one of the major factors that impacts our likelihood of reaching the NBA. At the average male height, the odds are astronomical. Some years there are only a couple of 5'9" players even rostered in the NBA. And even in the 6'6" to 6'8" range, which makes you the tallest person in the room almost everywhere you go, the odds are still stacked against you. But at the 7-foot threshold, a study from Sports Illustrated says that you have about a 1 in 6 chance. Basically, if you're 7 feet tall and can walk and chew gum at the same time, there's a good chance that you'll get to meet Adam Silver. It can also be eye-opening to see how easily our decisions can be swayed by things that we aren't even aware of. For example, a study looked at a group of judges overseeing more than 1,000 parole board decisions. Rather than the specifics of the case being looked at, the biggest predictor for whether parole would be granted was how recently the judge had eaten. In the mornings or right after lunch, they granted parole around 65% of the time. Right before lunch or later in the afternoon, the rates plummeted and nearly everyone was denied. So what does all this mean for free will? Well, it means that it's messier than we might have thought. While our decisions aren't being made for us, we also don't make them in a vacuum. We're greatly affected by our genetics and our environment, and the genetics and environment of the people we interact with, none of which we control. But though our freedom to choose isn't always absolute, it isn't absent either. We do have reflexes that want to simplify some decisions down to a coin flip, but we also have the ability to reflect and make considered choices, especially on things that matter. For these big decisions, our unconscious mind might work behind the scenes to set the stage, but our conscious selves have the ability to weigh in as well.